Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MPF webinar for the month of February 2025. We're delighted you're here, and we got a great program and a great set of panelists, and very eager to jump into the conversation. We'll introduce everybody shortly, but for now, Don, how you doing? How's the weather?
Very good, John. Great, delighted to be here. It's beautiful down here in Fort Myers, Florida.
Don't make us jealous, Don. Don't make us jealous.
I'll try.
And
I'll try to be nice.
and Mark, how about you? How you doing today?
Oh, good. Nice to be here. Thank you very much, John.
A pleasure to have you, and thanks for stepping in and interested in what you do and how you do it there at Baker Donelson. And Ben, as well, welcome to you. Where are you this afternoon, my friend?
So I'm coming like Don from the beautiful state of Florida. It's anybody who's been down here knows that it's exceptional weather that kind of makes up for some of the warmer, balmier, more inclement times a little bit later. But it's fantastic to be here. Really excited to learn not only from the other panelists, but from everybody in the audience as well. Some great stats I know that are going to come out of this. So really excited to see that.
Well, welcome, guys. And we do bring great stats. That's one of the things people like most about these programs, and the banter among hopefully some smart people about important topics to running mid-sized law firms. So normally my partner in crime, Uri Gutfreund, would be with us. This is our, I think, 58th, 59th webinar. And Uri started, and we started these when COVID hit. We had nothing to do. But Uri is flying today from New York to Israel, and they wouldn't let him do a webinar on the airplane. So I'm flying solo in the moderator role, and we have plenty to talk about. So let me formally introduce today's guest speakers. And Mark Carlson. Mark is the Chief Growth Officer at Baker Donelson. Baker Donelson has 650 lawyers, 24 offices. They're growing like gangbusters, rooted in Memphis, Tennessee. This is Howard Baker's law firm. So, Marks, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And we're going to talk a little bit about what you do as a chief growth officer. You are a Harvard lawyer, so we're interested in how that role works. And so thank you for joining us, Ben Chiro. And I'm going to kill your last name after we talked in our prelim. Ben
Chiriboga.
Chiriboga. I'm going to go with Chiriboga, and Ben shares the title with Mark. He's a chief growth officer at Nexl. So, Ben, welcome.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here. And yeah, sharing the stage with Don and Mark is great. And yeah, to your point, I'm really excited to hear from both of these individuals on their journey.
And Mark's a recovering lawyer. I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit about his story and how he wound up where he did coming out of law school as a chief growth officer. We'll learn about what Nexl does as well. And last but certainly not least is Don Mrozek. And Don's been on many managing partner forum programs over the years. And Don chaired Hinshaw Culbertson, a Chicago-based firm, and oversaw tremendous growth there as managing partner. What, 27 years, Don, in the role?
27. Yes.
27. And
Yes.
Don, say hello and welcome.
Hello, everybody. So happy to be here.
And we're happy to have you guys. Thank you to Nexl. They're our business partner on this particular program. They sponsored our fall symposium in Chicago, the women's program. And Ben, just for the benefit, what does Nexl do?
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much. Great to be with everybody. I'll tell a quick story that'll be illustrative, and I do mean quick. You know, whenever I was practicing, one day I went on a client call with a partner, and at that point in time, we didn't have something like a CRM. CRM stands for Client Relationship Management. What client relationship management does and what it allows for partners to do is get the insights into the relationships and the status of their relationships with clients. So let's pretend like I was going on a client call. On the way over, we were driving over, let's say from Miami to Fort Lauderdale. Nexl allows for a senior partner to very quickly open up his phone, look into a contact, let's say a client that we were going, and very quickly see I have spoken to this person 2 times over the last 6 months. I have also met his 4 or 5 of his partners. This is the type of work that we've done with him, and this is the potential type of work that we could do with him. Now, Nexl gives all of that information in the palm of your hand so that you can very quickly get that insight. We're doing much more than that today, but for purposes of this conversation, it really Nexl really gives partners and lawyers access to their relationship contact details and relationship insights so that lawyers can come better prepared to their meetings with their clients.
So we'll learn more about what you guys do and relationships. It's really all about relationships, trustful
Exactly.
relationships. I think clients hire lawyers, not law firms. They know, like, and trust. I say that all the time. Before we jump in, our upcoming programs, our big show is in May 7th and 8th in Atlanta, and registration's open. We're still working on some details, the faculty and such, but check us out. It'll sell out, and we've been doing that for about 25 years. We'll get about 120 managing partners from all over the continent, although we're getting a little pushback from our Canadian friends lately due to the trade war and such. So that's interesting. Didn't see that coming. We do a newsletter, got a website with a bunch of resources. We're trying to help managing partners, God love them, be more effective in a very challenging but often ill-defined role. Leadership in law firms. And Don's going to talk to us about a plan and why you need a plan to take your firm into the future. So that's a little bit about Managing Partner Forum. Today's webinar, we're talking about growth and getting serious, deliberate, intentional about growth, if that's what your firm wants to do, and offering some very strategic guidance to managing partners to make it happen. We have two growth. Don Mrozek, he was in charge of growth at a firm that was very successful executing a strategy. It didn't just happen. They made it happen. And Mark, I think, will echo that, you need a strategy, you need a plan, not just growth for the sake of growth. We'll do the surveys, we'll do the audience polling. So please participate in those, and we'll follow up with our usual recording and handout material. And your deal to us as listeners is to give us your feedback. That's all we ask. When at the end of the program, a couple of questions: what you like, what you don't like, topics for future programs. I'd love to read minds, but I just can't. So tell us what you're interested in, and we'll do our darndest to deliver that. Our first of several polling questions, this for our panel to give us a sense of firm sizes on today's call. If you would, get out your device and indicate your firm size within these different categories. And we'll give folks a few minutes to vote here, and then off to the races. But this polling technology people love. If your firm's doing webinars for clients, or you're out presenting at a conference, people love this polling technology. We hear it all the time. I'm in Georgia. Mark, we know how to count votes here in Georgia. So I'm going to end the poll, and we have about 70% of you weighing in, and here are the firm sizes. We typically set right at mid-law, sort of 25 to 100 lawyers being our sweet spot. So with that, back to our show and data. And I'll invite our panelists to comment on what we learned when you all registered. We asked you a handful of questions. And the first of which, and Ben, thank you very much for your input on these questions. The term best describing your firm's posture toward merger and acquisition. And we gave you a couple of choices. Okay, if we get acquired, gobbled up by Baker Donelson or Hinshaw Culbertson. Okay, only if we're the dominant firm. We're not wild about this, or hell no. And here's what you told us. So, Mark, I'll invite your comments. We'll go alphabetically here. Does this surprise you, given our firm
Oh
sizes
no,
here
no,
today?
and I'll go into detail later about kind of what different parts of my role are, but certainly with respect to the part of my role that's about kind of talking to potential merger partners, talking to opening offices. I've opened a couple offices in the last 2 years for the firm. We talk to a lot of people. I would say almost everybody falls in those middle two categories. So from a practical standpoint, from our perspective, if they're openly okay, if they're the dominant firm, most of the firms we're talking to are substantially smaller than we are. So to us, that's a no. I never leave those conversations just after the word no. To me, it's about, like you said before, building a relationship. Who knows what we're going to think 2 years and 5 years down the road, and who knows where they're going to be 2 years and 5 years down the road. Most of the conversations I have are really about understanding where they're trying to go and what they're trying to do. This is absolutely the first question you have to understand what their goals are.
I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Price Waterhouse wants to acquire you one day. I mean, things are
We don't have any
happening
offices in Arizona, so they won't be doing it yet.
well, Salt Lake City. You can go to Salt Lake City, and Don and I were talking about this earlier this morning. That we've been talking about the multidisciplinary practices out in the regulatory sandboxes for a while, and I predicted 5 years ago this was going to sweep the land. There's no stopping it, and it just hasn't happened. But watch out for those CPA firms. They know how to grow intentionally, and it'll be interesting. Don, any comments from
Yeah,
you on these
yeah,
results?
yeah. I would like to supplement a little bit what Mark said. What is not surprising but verified here is that if you take the two top as being pro uh, merger, if you will, 55%. If John, you keep statistics, I would challenge you to go back about 7 years, and I think you'd find that number much, much smaller. It was kind of a
True.
large term game for many, many years. And since at least the last 2 years, continuing into this year, most of the action is actually in mid-size firms and even small firms. I mean, I'm currently working with two boutique intellectual property lawyers that firms that want to merge, as an example. The, total of 25 lawyers. So what's happened is your quote unquote cross-border mergers are still going on, but there are fewer of them. But there's tons of action down in the medium to smaller firm range.
I agree.
And likewise, not that I don't want to go on too long with this, it's also true geographically. It's gone beyond the big city markets into the mid city and even smaller city markets. So exciting time actually for small and mid-sized firms.
Ben, let me invite your comment, and then I'm going to quickly go through the rest of these registrant slides, and we'll go into our more
Of
in-depth
course.
conversation.
Really nothing to add. Don actually took my comment. What I was most interested is this statistic over time going back and what that really looked like. However, I'm also interested in what this slide will look like going forward. Today, a KPMG executive put out a big thing about coming into big law. I think a lot of people maybe saw that, and of course the changing sandbox nature of it. All really interesting, of course, in terms of what that. I would also ask, what's not in this slide, which would be interesting, is if we're acquired, if we're the dominant firm, but what if the merger was one of equals? And I think that's a little
Oh,
bit to
those are
Don's point,
tough.
which is,
Those are tough.
Pete, but if you can make it happen, it might be a 1 + 1 = 3 for everybody. But I certainly understand that there's more to that than meets the eye.
We've been asking variations of this question for 15 years among managing partners at Midlaw, and the motion is toward, as Don suggests, more openness to being acquired. We used to say hard no. We are fiercely independent and do not want to be acquired by a bigger law firm. But we're seeing more and more firms willing to entertain uh, being acquired. And I think often it's due to a lack of succession planning,
Mm.
or is one of the root causes. Is we haven't trained up our young lawyers to take over the operation, and our seniors are starting to fade out. And Mark, are you seeing that sort of thing? You're acquiring smaller firms.
Oh,
What do you see as their
absolutely.
main reason for wanting to talk to you?
It's all about succession planning, right? And so like there are a lot that are not wild to buy, and no way. Like the ones that are really doing well right now, that there are a lot of 150 person lawyer firms are doing great right now, and they tend to be in the attractive growth markets where firms like us and other firms want to be. So they are very polite, but they will get a no pretty directly. The firms that are doing well, that are interested in doing a transaction, are almost always some form of succession planning issue or an issue of wanting to provide a longer term platform for their next generation, which doesn't mean that the leader of the firm is walking out the door in 5 years, but they know that for those people to be successful after the founder departs, they have to have a broader platform and more people to collaborate with. So those are the two main drivers of the conversations that the
Interesting.
willingness of the other side to have those conversations with us.
We asked, how would you grade your firm on integrating laterals, both lawyers and support staff? Here's what you said. Don, you think we have some false positive here to this to these
I
responses,
think
yeah?
those numbers are really, really high. And congratulations if it's all true. But I'd like to see the metric that proved it. But in any event, it's critical to keep track of what successes you've had and haven't had. And that begins with knowing what success looks like. Uh, and not as easy sometimes as it sounds. But the bottom line is, if this is a true picture, we have a great audience, and we have a great audience regardless. But that's very, very high. The statistics I've seen, perhaps phrased differently. The question being was, what is your success rate? I see it asked that way with lateral partners, and that tends to be closer to 50.
Interesting.
Now, you don't get the details. You don't find out what did success look like to these firms, but you get a subjective statement that, hey, some of them really worked out great and some of them really didn't.
This integration piece, bringing people on is great. Holding them, getting them truly fully integrated into your firm I think it needs to be a very deliberate sort of thing. Mark, I assume you guys really focus a lot on the integration piece as you bring on new offices, new practice areas.
Absolutely, and Don, and I agree with you. This looks like all the law firms in Lake Wobegon, where everybody's above average, because I don't think this is
Well,
really how it's playing out. So, but the first hire I made after taking this role was I needed someone really focused on shareholder recruiting, and we basically took a superstar in our group, not in our group, in the firm in another department, and was able to lure her over. And her title is director of lateral recruiting and integration. And so she's in charge of both. She doesn't have to do all of it, but we start working. Basically, the second interview is when we start the integration process. We start putting together the 100 and the 9 month and the 12 month and the 2 year plans for people. Start making sure they're meeting with for the interviews the people that are going to be critical for the integration process. If there are synergies for the hiring, then we want that person to be meeting with the synergistic lawyers to make sure there's enough chemistry there and opportunity. If there aren't synergies for the hiring, then we shouldn't be hiring the person. So we can't find people for them to start meeting with early to do the integration. That's usually a red flag that this is probably somebody we shouldn't hire. But this is absolutely the most critical part of what we do in our team. And it goes from high level equity partners, shareholders in our firm to junior associates. We had a conversation this morning about doing more to enhance the lateral integration for the second and third year associates that we hire too.
And you mentioned 2 years. 2 years. This doesn't happen in 90 days or a week. 2 years. integration kind of plan, man?
The one thing that Megan is her name, who's the director of lateral shareholder recruiting and integration, she implemented that's been really good. We have all hands, meaning the marketing person, the practice group chair, the department head, the operations director for that department, the lateral, and Megan, 90 days in, everything's on the table. Are you doing what you said you were going to do? Are we doing what we're going to say we're going to do? What are the issues? Let's be honest, because if we can find something wrong at 90 days, we can fix it. If we find it at 12-month check-in, it's too late. The relationship is sour and opportunities are missed. That's been really critical to
90 days.
90 days to accelerate
90-day
good
check-in.
integration,
Good idea.
and then to sort of salvage situations that might have gone poorly if we hadn't been so deliberate about it early.
Now, Mark, are your integration plans in writing? Something we can check the boxes and make sure we're actually doing these things.
Let's just go to basics here. Yes, it's not a plan if it's not in writing. No, it's in writing. There are names and dates and accountable parties. All the things you need in a busy law firm where all the practice group chairs who are responsible for implementing these things, they're practicing lawyers. So there need to be dates and there need to be support people in the structure to make sure that everybody's doing the things they need to be doing.
I always say who, what, where, when, folks. You know, we can talk, but who's in charge and what's the deadline and what's the mission? Ben, anything on integration before we jump to our next survey result?
Sure. Just one point, just because we brought it up, it would be so interesting to see this slide, but changed for succession planning. How well is your firm doing at succession planning, and whether or not the same? You know, I think there's a lot of emphasis on lateral partners, but the bigger gorilla in the room, of course, is the offboarding of clients and the succession planning with the generational shift that's coming. So that's certainly huge. I'll just add in on a stat piece. You know, I went back, and John, you guys have such good stats. I went in and I went through all your stats and I put it into ChatGPT and it categorized all of it for me and gave me some insights. And one for this was, even though in this case, let's say 60%, let's take that as true. I went back and I looked, and there was an interesting stat. Only 33% of firm leaders believe that they're vetting good lateral partners, good firms, or they were confident. So it's interesting, you know, the step before,
Yeah.
you might be integrating somebody great in a great way that might not be a good fit, you know, and it's easier. And I'm sure that Mark can speak to why that's probably hard, the black box nature of it, all of this kind of, it can be easier said than done, you know. It's you only know if you're going to be a good marriage after you get married or something like that, right?
Right?
Well, I think, let's date for a while. Let's live together
Yeah.
before we tie the knot, right? I mean, this is a
Right.
big deal to
Yeah.
join a firm as a lateral, especially as an equity partner. Let's date for a while, I think. We asked about kind of what level the integration plan is developed. Is it kind of a firm-wide process, consistent across offices, practice areas? Does the practice group kind of drive the integration? Is it the office location? Here's what you told us. Don, when you went about your growth strategy at Hinshaw, was it a true firm-wide approach, or was it more to practice groups and offices?
The firm-wide approach consisted of trying to make the practice group really the leader of the integration effort. We were very involved, dedicated to focus on practice group. Having said that, there's a reality of the situation as well. Even things are probably a little different now with all the remote lawyering going on, but having someone next door, the closeness of the relationship is also important. So it was always a combination. The practice group leader was was the leader, so to speak, in charge, so to speak, of the integration, but they were asked to coordinate closely with the office partners in charge because those people had knowledge that the practice group leader didn't. So it was a combination, but practice group driven. And before I leave this, I just want to something Mark said, I think is just so critical. I think it's worth repeating. I know we're not on laterals for this question, but there's going to be there's a lot of lateral discussion that needs to be had. And what I have found again and again and again is the importance of very quickly analyzing how the situation is going. 90 days, terrific, because most firms will not do that or haven't been doing it. They'll say, oh, they need a couple years to get going. They need a year. That's in some cases just plain baloney. By 90 days, you got a pretty good idea of what business they said they were going to bring that they're bringing. You got a better idea about exactly how they're working. You have a chance to correct the situation. It's great advice.
Mark, do you want to pile on to that one or move
The
forward?
only thing I'll say, so we're very similar to what Don did. We absolutely, we're practice group managed, but there's a real element. Each of our office managing shareholders is kind of the face of the office, very much thinking about kind of how we raise the profile of the office in that particular location. So there's a lot of opportunity for the office managing shareholder and the practice group chair to strategize on individual candidates. The other piece that's not on here, and maybe it's covered by ad hoc, is almost the way I see what we do mostly, which is it's individualized and for the attorney. And so what we build up might be firm wide, but it's probably not. It probably involves the local office, 3 other offices, their home practice group, and probably 2 or 3 other practice groups, but depending on their practice area is. So nobody's plan looks even remotely the same, but it's really based up on what we learned in the discussions all through the integration
Very
process. And to the extent
bespoke,
we did the
bespoke.
outward
Yeah.
recruiting, what we planned for when we were looking for someone like the candidate.
Excellent. I work with a lot of firms. They're trying to bring this firm culture together. We're not a collection of islands. Let's try to break down the walls and truly integrate as a firm. And I like industry practice groups, but the practice groups are really important to drive this. Ben, anything on at what level, who's in charge of integrating the new folks to the firm?
Just for sake of time, I think maybe let's move forward. But I love what Mark said about sort of a both and approach, right? And I would only add here that today we have data that can really help kind of clarify that individual path in terms of who needs to be introduced to who at what period of time. And I think that would add into the 30, 60, 90-day plan to ultimately drive success because like these two gentlemen know, I think, you're going to figure out whether or not it's going to work in some period of time. All I would say is data can kind of help you figure that out much quicker,
Yeah.
in effect, by giving you a little
No,
bit of guidance.
for the notion of a sponsor, someone who's going to kind of take you under their wing, get you around to the offices, let you know about the things you need to know that aren't necessarily in the partnership agreement, but someone who's going to kind of take care of you. And the analogy, I loved it. It's like a plant. You get a new plant, you put it in your office. You got to water it. You got to fertilize it. You got to show it some light if it's going to flourish. Otherwise, it just might wither away and not be there very long. So the idea of a sponsor, I think, is an interesting. We had an open-ended question. I tried to capture some of the responses to this. Regional. Ben, you wanted to talk a little bit about kind of regional strategies. Here's a sampling of what people said. I like cautious, optimistic. Lots of words here, but there seems to be an openness to it. To your point, Don, more and more firms are willing to, to look at possibilities. Baker Donelson is a very regional firm. I think of you guys as a southeastern firm primarily, and I'm sure that's intentional.
So yes, we go from Baltimore to Fort Lauderdale, west to Houston, and we're essentially everywhere in between. We look at the Maryland edition we added when we brought in the Oberkaler firm at the beginning of 2017 as kind of a mid-Atlantic play. So, but a lot of people know that Washington and Maryland are really basically the South, even though they're not kind of traditionally considered part of it. But it's for us the point of there's a commonality of culture, there's a commonality of sort of networks, but there's also economic growth that's substantial and consistent, that's driven by in the United States, it's driven by the Southeast. A lot of that's driven by by Florida, Texas, the Carolinas. The last three offices we opened were in the Carolinas, which wasn't an accident. And so part of the strategy is to take advantage of where we have connections, where the industries that we're strong in are located. And part of it's to make sure we're able to take advantage of the growth that the region is driving on its own.
And Mark, do you have plans to expand geographically into the Midwest, other parts of the country?
We're certainly open to it. My view on it is that it really needs to be contiguous growth. I don't want to jump. Like there's not. I've lived in Seattle, but I don't think I'd want to open like a 10-person office in Seattle, just because it takes a long time to get there, and there's different cultures and different clients and all these types of things. So there's the contiguous piece. It's got to be in a growth type market. There are great growth markets all over the country, and I always say the same ones so people know what I mean, but we don't have plans there. But I talk about Boise and Salt Lake and Columbus and Des Moines and Denver and Phoenix. These are all great growth markets that are similar to the growth markets of Atlanta and Raleigh and Nashville and basically everywhere in Florida that we've got and Dallas that we've got in the Southeast. And then I would also say we would really be looking for a practice or specifically an industry tie-in so that the growth makes sense. That one opportunity has an opportunity to sort of provide more growth opportunities for our existing lawyers and for our existing lawyers to be able to leverage the expertise of those lawyers.
Don, was your growth strategy sort of geographic centric, or
It was driven
were you
by
deliberate?
two things. Number one was clients and to a certain extent industry, but specific clients within an industry that were talking to us about different opportunities they saw for the firm. And the other was the reputation of the firm. For example, we traditionally do a lot representing other professionals in all their areas. That made for us being approached from quite often actually about wanting to join us because they wanted to be part of that reputation you had. So it was driven a lot by client industry considerations, but also encouraging our lawyers to develop their reputations on a broader scale. Don't be satisfied with, I'm going to go talk at the Chicago Bar Association, get on an ABA panel where your audience is much broader. And it was actually proved to be quite successful for us.
I grew up in Florida at Gunster, and that was how I got into this law firm business. And I can't tell you how many times you'd see firms out of the Northeast, the Midwest, open up their Boca office, their Palm Beach office, their Naples office, because a partner had a place down there. Or, there's rich people down there. Client driven. Strategic growth. I can't tell you how many firms in and out of Florida over the years. Just not well reasoned and not properly vetted, in my opinion, some of these growth opportunities. Ben, anything? Here's a question. Vote, folks, if you would, while we're talking. Our poll's open in the background. Ben,
Yeah,
anything on geographic?
from a regional basis, I was very interested in this because I think post-pandemic, what we've seen is the fluidity of people, where they're located and where they're moving. Of course, so you take these two trends: people are staying in jobs less, and also people are moving much more. And this kind of changes the dynamic of where these new regional opportunities are opening up. I think the second part of that is that I'm going to come back to data again. Once you start to understand relationship data, once you understand contact data, once you understand sort of insights from these data, you start to see that your, let's call it your network, is much larger than you would think that it actually is. And you might have connections that are much more far-fetched than you would think, and opportunities that are much different than you were. But of course, you have to get your hands around the data and sort of the network graph of what you're working with. So these two trends to me are very interesting vis-a-vis vis-a-vis the idea of geography. We know about practice opportunity, we know about industry growth, but it's like, are there pockets of growth based on what the data and also the trend around moving is sort of suggesting? And those firms that are aggressive can kind of like see these opportunities before others.
Ben,
Well, and
can
we
you give
got
me
the
any?
remote firms popping up like Fisher Broyles and Ramon Law and these hybrid
Exactly.
models. I look
Yeah.
at what Hush Blackwell's doing, for example, and they've got a virtual partner track. You can be anywhere, not even in the U.S. Interesting, and getting out of the box a little bit as to how the traditional law firm operates. Don, I'm sorry I cut you off.
Yeah, Ben, can you give us just an example of the type of data you're talking about? Look, we can pick
Sure.
geography. Since we've been on geography, we'll leave it at geography. But just
Sure.
what's out there, what's available,
Of
what
course.
did,
So high level. So let's I'm gonna keep it really high level because I want to
yeah.
go to the thing. So, data generally can be boxed into first party data, which is kind of the data from your firm, and then third party data, which is from data that's outside. Why do I give those two characterizations? If you understand your relationships and your contacts, not your clients, your relationships and your contacts, you can quickly start to see, hey, we have relationships and contacts in X, Y, and Z geographies. So we can say that we have this sort of critical mass of relationships in these geographies. These might just be contacts. These might just be former clients. These might be alumni. These might be relationships from somebody else. But you can start to clump those in and actually see those. Once you take that and you then interlace it with the third party data, which is what is the growth that is happening in these regions, you can very quickly start to see we know a lot of people here, and also we know a lot of people in this industry that we're not talking to right now, and also this industry is growing at 5, 6, 7% based on the companies in this area are growing and or hiring at 4, 5, 6, 7%. Does that make sense, Don? So you can clip these two things together and you can get insights into, we know a lot of people in industries and practices that are growing.
Yeah. I
My
think they
fi- my
lumping
my
it together is the key. Yeah.
my
You know,
observation is in a lot of smaller and mid-sized firms, the people don't want to share their relationships. These are mine. This is how I derive my control, my power, my compensation, my network, my relationships. I don't want to share them with my partners. I run into that. I don't want to put my client data into the firm's database. And this notion that we're a collection of sole practitioners sharing space. And boy, if we could harness all that collective relationships and energy, man, we I think make so much more happen if we're willing to share those relationships and think like a firm as opposed to a collection of individuals and fiefdoms and what have you. It's my observation. We got another polling question. AI technology. Let's carry on this conversation, folks. If you would vote, are you putting some of these tools to work? As you look at growth, the artificial intelligence, and are you using it systematically and such? So if you would vote in, and Ben, I'll turn back to you on what's out there
Yeah.
in
It's a
terms of
really,
tools.
really, really big question. Of course, I would bucket it in terms of there's the technology way and there's the manual way, And of course, firms today can sort of take a blended approach. I appreciate just as much as everybody else. I was practicing in a boutique small firm before I went into technology, and it is hard to sort of stand this up. It's either difficult to get it sort of started, or difficult to maintain it, or a little bit of the two, even though tools are much easier to use. Um, I can go
Could I
into vendors, but the truth is you there those are the two paths. You can sort of do this very manually, where you're going around and you're pulling out, and do we know these people and do we know there, or there's technology ways that can start pulling you down, and it's a lot similar to what I sort of talked about with Don. Tools today are able to basically give you insights by combining data together, but you do have to have the data.
I would
you
add,
talked about, Mark?
I would say I would add that, especially given the size of a lot of the firms that are here, the more you're able to think about the business functions of your firm that can use this type of data, the more the expense that might seem like a lot, but is really only one great engagement or one great lateral away from paying for itself. But the more, so a lot of the technology that we use on our team gets used a lot by the marketing department, and a lot of we piggyback on their technology. And so thinking about how you can use it in multiple ways might make an investment or even just a trial make more sense. I do think the pulling out the Rolodex to find if you know somebody in Seattle, because I said Seattle before, is not functional because you lose all the ability to make the multiple connections. You might find a person in Seattle, but you don't realize that the person in Seattle also happens to be in XYZ industry, which is an area you're growing, and also happens to know somebody in another practice group, in your firm, and having that information at the tip of your fingers is really useful for recruiting, and it's critical for marketing.
I just had a demo with Leopard Solutions. They were acquired by SharePoint recently, and they have a database of, I think, 700,000 lawyers, about two-thirds of the
We use
lawyers
that.
in the country. And it's amazing. You can drill down on a firm, a practice group, an individual lawyer, and the information it can produce about the rates, the clients, the employment history, and how sticky this person is to the current employer. Somehow they gauge, is this person in play and looking around? And it's just a tool. It's not cheap. But I always say, to smaller firms, each individual is that much more important to the organization. You can't afford to slip up on this stuff. And so taking those extra steps, doing the due diligence, making sure you're getting good people who are going to integrate well into your firm is money well spent on the front end.
That's a cute thought.
Lateral
I like that. I like that one.
Lateral integration. We've got about 18 minutes. I'm keeping an eye on the watch, and I'm going with a puppy dog theme this month. And here's our new lateral hire, and he's eager to get in there. We've talked a little bit about lateral integration already. Anything to add, gentlemen, on how important it is? Maybe some tips, some strategies that we haven't already touched on that might be helpful to leaders of firms these sizes. Lateral. I
Yeah, I
stumped you.
would just repeat what we've already said in terms of the timing of it. Get started early on evaluation
Uh-oh.
and help and assistance. Um, Beyond that, I'd say the market is nuts. The amount of firm skipping is crazy. And you're almost forced to be in the market whether you like it or not, because you're going to lose people these days. It's just happening all over. I don't know if that'll end. Mark, the economy is still pretty strong, and that tends to drive law firm growth. But you have to recognize it for what it is. The statistics I've seen are staggering. The amount of associates who stay longer than 5 years in firms, which used to be high 80s and 90s, is much, much, much lower. So
Indeed.
whether you like it or not, lateral partner hiring is here to stay. And you need to devote time and energy to it. You need to have a plan. That's what today's session is about. And you need to devote not just the time, you get what you pay for. You need to be willing to devote firm resources to people within your firm to carry out these tasks. If they're just doing it, but all we really look at is book of business and working attorney fee receipts, and we say we look at other things, but no one can ever see it. That's not going to work. You got to pay for it. You got to get
So
people
Ben,
within your do the work, and you got to pay for it.
Ben, you asked that we introduce this question. I think it's a really good one. And why don't these laterals stick with us? And if you had to pick one reason, what's the number one reason why the lateral might not work out? And here are the choices we offered. If you would, folks, I want to see some voting in here. Let us know. Ben, you want to talk to us a little bit about
Sure.
why so often what seems to be a good fit doesn't work out?
Well, I'd love to hear actually Mark's perspective from sort of inside the trenches on this and just have him reiterate it. To before I pass it over to Mark for the hard for the hard question that he's gonna answer tactfully. 86. If I went back to your statistics, 86% of firms. This is your stat from last year. 86% of firms are in the lateral markets looking and buying. Just think of that. Almost everybody, basically, almost everybody. Of course, we
Yeah,
see a bubble happening right now, and that's what we're in. So then you match bubble inflation economy with lower retention getting lower and lower. And of course, I mean, that's not a recipe for success in any respect. So these things are super difficult. And, I mean, it's really difficult. I would only add on the data piece before passing over to Mark, another crucial part about lateral integration is making sure that people are matched up with the right people in the right period of time and getting that over. Relationship and contact data today can show you who knows who. So what I mean by that is once you have access to who are these relationships, who are these clients, everybody knows who's client. Yeah, we get that. But what about the relationship? What about somebody that you're not doing work with, but that possibly your lateral hire did know or does know that can basically be introduced? If you start to have that and you start to do this Venn diagram mapping, you quickly start to see, and I think this is what I was speaking about before, very quickly to see, okay, we have a 30, 60, 90-day plan, but what's the details? The devils are in the details. Who are we going to introduce them to? Who's going to be the first person, the second person? How are we going to check in on those specific relationships? And I think that that's how you get closer to success, which is, I mean, in this, and then just to map these two things together, you're paying top dollar for people who are willing to leave within 3 to 5 months. Let's make sure that they're well integrated by making sure that they're talking to the right people in the right period of time. Easier said than done. I know
yeah.
it's hard and it's difficult.
So I guess I would go back to something that Ben mentioned earlier about the vetting piece. So I look at the first and the third one here, that no matter how good your integration process is, if there isn't a strategic fit, it's really not likely to be a success. And then the last thing you really want to do is waste a really fantastic strategic fit on a terrible integration plan. So I really, to me, it is the intersection of those two. If you're having trouble putting together an integration plan, it's probably because there's not a strategic fit. And so you really need just to think a lot about that. I follow UNC basketball. I didn't go to Chapel Hill, but I follow UNC basketball, and I happen to like Hubert Davis. He has decided they're not having a great season, and he's decided that he needs a general manager. And I've had people describe the situation we're in. Ben called it a bubble, but the transfer portal era of law firms, and you just need someone at your firm that's thinking about where you are now and where you want to be in terms of people and practices and rates and geographies, all of that mix, where you are now and where you want to be. And it doesn't have to be a chief anything, but it needs to be somebody who wants to do that, is capable of doing it, and has the time that your firm affords them to really dig into data and relationship development and spend time talking to a lot of people and never saying no to anyone and always maintaining relationships, because you don't know where things are going to go. But you need the resources to do it, because it really is a complicated and critical function in 2025.
Mm.
Laterals, cultural fit. We hear a lot about the cultural fit and how we make sure we are gonna get along before we hook up. Uh, Mark, psychological assessments, are they valid metrics to apply to lateral
Gosh.
hiring situations? Do you use them
So
to
I'll answer
evaluate and onboard
I'll
talent?
answer the second question. what we are thinking a lot about how to use them to support our summer program. And we really do think the organic growth through new associates that kind of come up, trained on our systems, trained in our culture, kind of ingrained in our clients, that really is a critical piece to our short and long-term growth. I'm intrigued by psychological assessments. I do think I don't mean to undercut them, but the sort of the garbage in, garbage out. And what I would say the garbage in is that I don't know if we know well enough that we can describe accurately to someone what our culture is. And so we would take our input and put it into a very sophisticated, high quality system and not necessarily get the best sort of roadmap for a new hire. As a practical matter, I've just never been able to find, things are competitive. Don just said that, and they're fast moving. And if you got to make a decision, and you got to figure out how to do things, interjecting a personality assessment into a fast moving lateral competition is just not something I've found the on ramp for even to try it, even though we've talked about potentially doing it.
Don, you and I have talked about psychological assessments for years, and are they a worthwhile tool that law firms should be using?
They certainly could be. I just know, I don't really know any firms that are using them to any extent. Maybe occasionally. I think because they're used so seldomly, a good candidate who has opportunities might shy away from the whole idea.
A little
I
off-put
don't
by
know.
it.
But I mean,
Well,
there's
our
nothing
polling,
wrong with the idea. That the idea is fine. It's just I don't see it in practice, and I see lawyers kind of pushing back against it. And I'm not sure of all the priorities you have on your plate whether psychological interviewing is worth the effort. I
we
would I
found
would I do want to point to something else that I think is very important and is kind of related. That is to say, third-party due diligence when you're dealing with laterals. I do think background checks are really important. Uh, it's like nothing goes wrong till it does. Uh, almost every time you're not going to turn up anything, but boy, the one or two times you might, it can be a critical situation. I told the story on a couple of panels over the years. I was working with a firm, had a new New York office, and was doing quite well until they found out their managing partner never passed the bar exam. Uh, Tried unraveling that piece of business. So,
Yep.
so I do think that is worth your money, and that is third-party due diligence that I think is worthwhile.
Marie tells that story of the managing partner who never went to law
Yeah,
school and passed
and
himself
that,
off and,
it's a
and,
true
and
story.
became an equity partner. And they never even made sure he was a member of the bar or even went to law school. I mean, that's just, the extreme. Uh, Firms that use them find them valuable. Our polling of this firms this size shows a very few, 5-6% use them. And those that do find him very, very helpful. And of course, the guru is Larry Richard on the lawyer psychological assessment. And I think there's something to it. We encourage firms, make sure you got a good fit here. Uh, I know when I was getting my MBA, just about every employer, once talks got serious, asked you to take a psychological assessment. Uh, Everyone. I was talking to a lot of investment banks, and they, the corporate world uses these faithfully. Law firms, I don't know. I think it might be something to look at to make sure you got that cultural fit. Uh, Don, you wanted to talk a little bit about this and the intentionality around growth and being proactive and deliberate, like this little guy running the course. Let's go there in our final minutes, and then we'll move to wrap up. Here's our polling question. And Don, why don't you
Yep.
lead us in this
Yeah,
little
I mean,
segment?
the, the, the key point is there's a dichotomy often used between opportunistic behavior and strategic behavior. And my one point that everyone should take away is you must have a strategic element, a strategic plan. You have to have one, and you have to dig deep. Is it going to be involved in organic and inorganic, one or the other, both? Are you going to, if you're going the inorganic route, you're going to focus on lateral partners, M&A, or to a certain extent both. Make yourself too thin, but have a plan. The second point related to have a plan is put somebody in charge of the plan. Get yourself a Mark Carlson. I had a real hard time 20 years ago trying to get somebody to do this job because I said this could be a full-time job, but it's definitely a big job in terms of your commitment. We're going to pay you for it. But they didn't want to get out of the practice that deeply. I think life has changed. And now we have people like Mark that are willing to take on the role. Give it to them. Put someone in charge, pay them, and let them run. Relatedly, this sounds funny coming from me. Have a little patience. Have a little
Does
patience.
sound funny
It
coming from you, Don.
takes time sometimes. You know, you don't do this. Lawyers move very slowly. They, believe it or not, when it comes to things like this, compared to, big company mergers and acquisitions, they get them done in 3 months. Lawyers, they can drag it out. Move quickly, get a person, put them in charge, pay them. That's my advice for the day.
We're seeing a lot of, the 80, 100 lawyer firms hiring directors of professional development, directors of talent success. I like that title, Director of Talent Success. Investing in your people and their skill sets, all those good things.
Yeah.
I'm looking at our clock, and like all good things, they must come to an end, and we've got to kind of move to wrap up. There's a lot to this topic, obviously, and we've just scratched the surface. But being intentional and knowing exactly the plan, Don, I couldn't agree with you more. About half of mid-sized firms this size say they have a written firm-wide strategy. Just half. Overwhelmingly, they'll tell you it's a good thing, improving our performance, our profitability, our sustainability. That's pretty compelling to the lawyers. We've never had a plan before. We don't need no plan. We've been fine without a plan. You still get a lot of that pushback, and I think it's a profession. But we're also running a business, and having a vision, having a plan, investing in your future, I think is really, really important stuff. Mark, you want to say one thing, and then we'll talk a little bit because you all obviously have been implementing a growth strategy with intention.
I guess I would say that when you said it doesn't sound like me, Don, I disagreed. When you said you need a strategic plan, but you need to be patient, I guess that some of the best decisions you're ever going to make are going to be no decisions because something that was opportunistic didn't actually fit with your plan. So I think you're being completely consistent.
Thanks.
Ben, your turn.
Not much, I think what's most interesting is kind of circling back to where we started. And we started this with wanting to hear, Don, I think either on the or off said, he was thinking about this role 20 years ago, and I think he's fleshed that out. And now Mark is kind of living this. I think the writing is on the wall. If you don't have somebody who's sort of thinking about this full time and kind of like dedicated, it's no longer even a nice to have. It's like a critical to have. You need somebody out really up front. That's the first observation, and I think we're just going to see this explosion of people who it doesn't need to be a chief, director, growth, whatever it is, but somebody is somebody who has that skill set, and data can play a big role in this because it sort of shows the writing on the wall and what's possible. But I think what's also interesting, and I'd love to hear Mark just 2 seconds on this, is culture is almost everything. If you looked at every single one of those polling questions we went through, the difficulties landed somewhere around culture. And just to link all of this up, it's like getting the right person to lateral into the firm will eventually lead to somebody who's willing to drive the culture forward. So if I'm making my case, it's like you want to grow intentionally, you have to have the buy-in from the people. That includes the people who are coming into the firm, who are going to be bought in on sort of extending that firm outside of they just come with a book of business. So yeah, just tying all of that together.
Mark, and then we'll go to our closing comments here.
I have nothing to add. I think Don and Ben both expressed things very well.
Don, you want me to add to this slide? We always close with, trying to give some guidance, that's helpful to managing partners, is defining what success looks like. You had me add that bullet point. Talk to us
Yeah,
about
I
that,
think
defining
as
what success looks like.
a lot of times that comes at the end of the strategic plan. I think it should be just the opposite. As you sit down to develop a plan, uh, one of the first things you should say is, what are my goals here? In other words, and how am I going to measure them? What is success going to look like here? And there's nothing wrong with revisiting your plan on a regular basis and
Oh, you
adjusting.
should. It should live and breathe. No, I think,
This thing,
Don.
this thing adjusts. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not a collar. It's something to keep you on track. And that would, I think it's a very worthwhile exercise to put yourself through and put your partners through. Where do we really want to be and why?
Yep.
The why is
Yep. Who
important.
are we? Where are we going? Why are we doing it? Those kinds of questions. And yeah, I'm with you on that. Unfortunately, guys, we're out of time. And thank you again. I knew this happens. We could go on all afternoon. There's so much to talk about. Our conference, check it out. Don, you've been a few times. Would you recommend it?
Highly
Mark, you've been
recommend
to
it.
our conference too.
It was
I highly recommend
worthwhile.
it.
So, sign up, everybody. It's really a good show. About half of the registrants come regularly. I mean, almost every year. And it's such a welcoming, friendly environment. You're not alone as a managing partner. The issues with which you're dealing are not uncommon. The talent retention, the succession plan, the business development, integrating AI into the practice. We're all dealing with this stuff. And to have a community willing to share openly how they're dealing with it is really helpful. So check us out and sign up if you're interested in coming. And next month we're going to invite Bill Jostin from Thomson Reuters to come talk to us about the state of the U.S. legal market. Thomson Reuters does it every year with Georgetown Law, so we're going to have him invite him in to call out some of the highlights. So that's in March. Topics. We're interested in what y'all want. So let me hear from you. We're recorded. We'll follow up with you. Our friends at Nine Sale, they do SEO, search engine optimization. We'll add that with CRM, SEO, DEI. But they do write-ups for us. We want to thank them. And we're in the process of building an AI community. And we got about 50 managing partners in there. And here's a forum to learn with your peers how they're dealing with this new scary thing called artificial intelligence. So check us out. We're here to help. Thank you, Mark, Ben, Don. Each of them have opened themselves. If you want to reach out, continue the conversation, feel free to reach out directly, and we'll follow up with you on our end, the usual stuff we send. So thanks, everybody.
Thank
Appreciate
you
your
very much.
being with us. And Don, great to see you. Mark, thanks for joining us. And Ben, appreciate your participation as well. And hope to see you all at our next program.
Thank you
Have a
much.
good
Bye.
afternoon. Bye,
Bye.
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye, everybody.